Sometimes the kindness we show or receive can change the course of someone's life. This is a story about two families, a debt of gratitude, and how life has a way of connecting the dots. Mrs. Aisha and Mrs. Adekunle had been friends for about 3 months. What started as casual visits turned into long conversations over tea. But on this particular day, something happened that neither of them could have imagined. When Mrs. Aisha saw a picture on the wall, her heart skipped a beat. She knew that face. But from where? Mrs. Aisha, looking puzzled. Who is this? Mrs. Adekunle, smiling. My husband, Mr. Adekunle. The name and face unlocked a memory buried in Mrs. Aisha's past. Years ago, during her university days, she was drowning in stress. Her final project was a nightmare, and she was on the verge of giving up. It was her project supervisor, Mr. Adekunle, who had stepped in when no one else would. He went above and beyond to ensure she succeeded. She owed her degree and her future to his kindness. Mrs. Aisha, your husband is the reason I graduated on time. I've always wanted to thank him, but I never got the chance. Mrs. Adekunle, sighing. That's amazing to hear, but life hasn't been so kind to me lately. My supervisor at school, he's been making things unbearable. As Mrs. Adekunle spoke about her challenges, she had no idea the connection about to be revealed. When Mrs. Aisha's husband, Mr. Ibrahim, walked in, Mrs. Adekunle froze. The man standing in front of her wasn't just her friend's husband. He was her supervisor, the one who had been making her so much cancellation on her project. Mrs. Adekunle, stammering. Wow! Welcome, sir! This is the man I talked about. My supervisor. Mrs. Aisha, looking at her husband. Wait! You're her supervisor? In that moment, everything clicked. Mrs. Aisha realized the irony. The man who had once been so kind to her now had his wife at the mercy of someone being unnecessarily harsh. Mrs. Aisha, firmly. Do you even realize who her husband is? He's the man who saved my future. How can you treat his wife this way? Her words struck a chord. For the first time, her husband saw things from a different perspective. The guilt was undeniable. Everything changed. He took over her project and ensured it was done perfectly, just as her husband had done for Mrs. Aisha years ago. It was a silent but powerful way of repaying the debt. Kindness has a ripple effect. What you give has a way of coming back to you, often through the most unexpected connections. A small act of kindness can change someone's life, and one day, it might change yours too. Subscribe for more life-changing stories.